Without further ado, my name is Anne. I'm a client advisor from Henley & Partner. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. The topic is talking about Henley & Partner education and how your children can get USA or Canadian passport after graduation. I'm delighted to say we have been joined by Tess Wilkinson from Henley & Partner Education Department, Ryan Guy from Startup Service, and Oliver Martineau from Limestone Investment. Before we get into the question, let's have a quick introduction to each of the panelists. Tess Wilkinson is our head of educational service with over 25 years of experience in the industry, and she is also a UK qualified teacher. Tess has working in British and European school, and most recently has been consultant for the British School of Brussels. Tess worked closely with a network of highly qualified and experienced North American, European, UK, Singapore, Australian, and New Zealand school specialists. Oliver is global head of sales for Limestone Investment. He has helped to facilitate the raising of over 500 million of EB5 capital over the last 10 years. Mr. Martineau is based in the USA and travels frequently to Asia. He's fluent in English, French, and Mandarin. Last but not least, Ryan Guy is the co-founder of Startup Visa in Canada. He is a dynamic executive with proven track record in assisting foreign family to migrate to Canada through the incubator program. Hi, Tess. Let's start with you. First question. May I check with you, why has Henley decided to go into the education space, and this seems a bit far from the core business of citizenship and residency by investment?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Anne. And it's actually far more logical than it may seem. Henley works with families globally who consider the best options, not only for investment migration, but of course for their children, because when they decide to move, or when they decide to relocate, then often education and their families are right at the top of the reasons for moving. So it just became apparent to Henley that there were more and more clients wanting additional information about education before they actually decided on the right investment migration programs. And it wasn't enough to have sort of piecemeal ad hoc advice, and what they wanted is a completely wraparound service, which we provide, because we're a team that brings together teachers, myself, qualified teachers, ex-head teachers, admissions directors, and specialists in educational needs, education as a whole. So we can offer the clients, Henley's clients, everything they need to help them make the right decisions and then navigate this very complex world of international education that can be quite overwhelming if you don't really understand. So we work very closely with families and while they're deciding on the right programs.
I see. Thank you so much, Tess. And Ryan, you focus on Canada Startup Visa. Could you give us an overview of how they work? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so very much. And thank you all for taking the time to being on this call too, wherever you are. It's morning here, afternoon for Tess, and evening for Anne and everybody else. So it truly is a global international webinar. We do focus on the Canadian Startup Visa. However, the name is confusing for a lot of people, but it still provides the one solution. And that is that you and your whole family can come to Canada on a permanent residency. And as Anne mentioned, by the time that they're done school, even high school, university or college, they can be citizens. Now, Tess and I were talking a bit before with Anne that the benefits are savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars per child. And you get your permanent residency in this program up front before you even arrive in Canada. So it is totally different. However, there is one catch, right? And everyone knows that there's always some sort of a catch. And that is you need to try and start a business, you or your spouse, and then all your kids under 22 get to come along. Try a business for 1 year. Now that can be daunting. Tess, an educator for life or expert on that side. So we do something that's an education. My other colleague here who speaks 3 languages, traveling international, is in France. we do something that's great for him that allows him still to be in France with his great ability to speak English, French, and Mandarin. So you can actually stay in your home country while doing Canadian business. So in all of this, though, as Tess mentioned, if you need an educational advice, you speak to Tess. If you need more advice on all the immigration, you speak to Anne. But when it comes to Canadian startup visa, we are the #1 provider worldwide. And we've got 100% success rate the last 3 years with Henley and Partners. Now, more to that fact is I was a teacher just for a short period of time with the federal government. My wife is a professor, and Slava, our CEO and founder, he's the sole founder. He's the one who actually is a professor at a lot of these groups. So education is normally the #1 reason why people come to Canada. Or a plan B is #2 for a brighter future, or #3 is to expand your business. No matter the reason, Henley and Partners with all the great people on here can help you out. And again, our success rate is 100%. We guide you through every step, and KPMG Law is the one who does all your immigration filing and helps you out with tax. So thanks, Anne. I appreciate it. And Tess.
Thank you, Ryan. It's very good. May I speak to Oliver, please? Obviously, you are focused on the US. Could you give an overview of the basic requirement of this program, please?
Of course, and thank you very much for having me on. It's really a pleasure. And I'm sorry I'm traveling, so I'm not sure how good my Wi-Fi connection is, but I'll try to make it through. So I work for Lightstone Group. We've been doing EB-5 since 2014, and we've had around 1,200 investors move to the US through investing in our programs in the States. And EB-5 is a little bit complicated, but it is the fastest way to get residency in the United States. You need to invest $800,000 into an approved regional center, which is a US government designation that allows a company in America to raise EB-5. Your money has to be at risk for roughly 5 to 6 years. So typically that goes into an investment project, like we build a lot of hotels and apartment buildings, that type of thing. And then because the program was created to stimulate the US economy, you also have to prove to the US government that we as a company, after you invested with us, created 10 jobs. So that is roughly the process to doing EB-5. There is actually a lot more to it, which I can get into in a second. But I would say, you know, the overwhelming majority of our clients, I would say 90% plus, do EB-5 so that their kids can go to university in the States. You know, there are major benefits to doing EB-5. And often we have clients whose children are already living in the US, already attending university, and they're in a position where they can't get a job with an American company after they graduate. And so EB-5 is a fast track to allow them to go get internships while they're in school, or to go get a job immediately upon graduation.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Tex, a question I'm sure a lot of attendees are eager to get your opinion on. How can one plan ahead to get a child into a top?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question, Anne. I'm really sorry.
I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear from your opinion, how actually one can get ahead to get the child into the top global university.
Yeah.
How can the child get
Well, it actually is quite interesting because it's become so competitive now. I mean, it really has. The landscape has changed hugely since before COVID. It's quite incredible when you think about the difference. Let's take the example of Harvard. Everyone knows Harvard. It tends to be the most aspirational university for most people. It's the university that by far educates the most centimillionaires. I mean, it is right up there. So if you look at the admissions rate, which is notoriously high, not high, difficult, it's very difficult to get into. Back in 2019, it had 40,000, roughly 40,000 applicants, and the admissions rate was about 7.8%. 2022, you move forward, post-COVID, the application rate was 3.19%. They had about 60,000 applicants. And there's, I think, 1,600, 1,900 places. It's very, very, very hard to get into. So when you're talking to parents, as we often do, and children who are super ambitious about where they want to go, you know, what's really important about working with families is not only to sort of give them very, very clear, very upfront advice on what type of universities actually suit their child or where they will flourish. And to do that, we have our assessment, the HAPA, which we use, the Henley Academic Profiling Assessment, because what we do is data driven. We don't just say, here you go, here's a list of universities, let's have a look at all of those. What we want to do is to ensure that for the child, we match them to the best possible university, not only for their interests and academic aspirations, but also their academic potential and their reality. So there is such a wide range of universities across the globe, and focusing on Canada and the US, they're very different application, or the whole process is totally different. I always say the States is by far the most complex. It's completely different. The Canada, you need to get the grades. If you get the grades, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a pay. The US, you're applying to a community. You can apply up to 20 colleges, maybe more, although that's an awful lot of essay writing. You know, so the time that we take to work with families often depends on where they want to go. And we tend to try and work with, certainly for the US, we'll work with families potentially 3 or 4 years out. Now, if they plan in advance and are working with people like Oliver and Ryan, then, and depending on the ambitions and the plans for the family, as Oliver said, if a child can potentially get into a US school to do a high school, then they're already well on track to be able to start school as a permanent resident. It doesn't really affect fees in the States. Fees are pretty much the same for international and domestic students. Canada is a totally different question. And it's well worth considering how to get your child potentially to do school in Canada, because if they can get the residency program started, they can then access universities as a domestic student, and they can save how much, Ryan? About 120,000, something like that.
So 120,000 to $250,000 per child for a 4-year degree.
Yeah. It's enormous. And I was just doing it's really, I mean, I always say when parents are talking to me, plan in advance, never be afraid of considering actually where may our children, where may our family decide to relocate to, if we decide to do that when their child is maybe only 11, 12, 13, because in fact, to get into these top universities, you really, really need to prepare not only for the academics and all the rest of it, but also as a person, because they're very specific about the type of people they want.
And do you mind if I hop in here? We'll make a bit more of a discussion there too. So for Tess and Tess, I love your example of Harvard, and I use that too, and it's helping out my colleague here, Oliver. If your child can get into Harvard, yeah, go for it. However, I'm a proud father of 3 children. We're sometimes skewed in what we think our children's potential is. So that's where it is great to get an analysis, and Anne can set that up with Tess to say, is that a potential? Because if it is, yes, go do that. Don't go to Canada, go to the US and go to Harvard. However, is your child part of that 3.19% through the complex side, where, again, I've got to go back to this, and Oliver mentioned numbers, I did not. I think that's fair to do that in the Canadian side. It's $250,000, okay, which includes the whole family. And again, our success rate is 100%. So that is an easier path. And then for a lot of people, our high school is free up to the age of 18. We have IB schools, international baccalaureate schools that are internationally recognized. And all you have to do is pay for the extra fee. Healthcare is included and everything else. But Tess made a great point of planning ahead of time. And it's a big word, but I'm going to have you say that again. The assessment that Henley does is a new tool. And this is why we love working with Henley, is they're the first ones who did a rating of the passports, which were number 7 or 8. Rating of the actual different sides. It is an amazing group. So what is the name of that assessment that they can do again, Tess?
The Henley academic profiling assessment. HAPA.
Is there a cost to that test?
Yeah, there
I'll
is
help
a
you out
cost to it. There is
Okay, and how long does that take, and what does it involve?
the HAPA is it's taken online. It is designed to see where a student stands internationally. So it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot of a student's ability at the time of taking the assessment. They do it at home, online, when it suits them, depending on the age of the student, because it's relevant for children from the age of 6 up to the age of 16, but can also be taken by 17-year-olds, but we tend to cut off there. And what it will do, it will enable us, once they've taken it, depends, an hour and a half to 2 hours, we can then have a look at what their potential is and what their academic achievement is. We talk to the parents about it. We can see quite clearly if they're children who have got the capacity to study in places like Harvard or Stanford or McGill or Toronto or Oxford or wherever they may decide to go. And we then can work with the families to identify the right type of universities. But it's very much an internal document that we provide for families. It's not something they can go, oh, look, I got the HAPA, this is what I can do. It's very much, we sort of do a follow-up session of feedback when the report is generated. We can identify if there are areas in the students' abilities in maths, English, verbal and non-verbal reasoning where they may need additional support, and if that's the case, we can work with them to try and up the areas where there are the sort of needs for potentially additional tutoring. So that's why it's so important. And you know, we mentioned the big names, and one of our jobs is to be really, as I said earlier, we have very frank and honest and open conversations with our families, because there is I'm a parent, you're a parent, you know, we all know that our children are not all the same, and not all universities or schools are right for them. And therefore we have to spend a lot of time understanding the child to understand where they're going to thrive, because a happy child will thrive. You put them in the wrong place, or you know, they will not succeed, and everybody suffers. So, you know, it's a really important, it's really important to mention all those many universities in Canada, France, the US, wherever they may be, where families and students will thrive, because most international families, they don't know them, they know the big names.
Thank you, Tess. Oliver, question to you. How if a family decides to send their children to the US for education, what is their pathway to citizenship in USA?
It's an excellent question. So I'd like to back up just a step, if I may. You know, I think it's important. It's funny, I lived in China for 10 years, and every single client that I've had from China wants to send their kid to Harvard or Stanford or Princeton. Most of them end up going to schools, honestly, in the UC system. So like UCLA, Berkeley, schools like that, UCSD are much more common, I would say. And then we have a lot of clients end up moving to Texas and New York as well. And one of the benefits of EB-5 is you can live anywhere in the United States. And like I said, we have a lot of people who are already in the States studying, and they're doing EB-5 visas for the purpose of being able to work. That's something that I think Canada does a lot better than the US frankly, excuse me, which is if you go to school in Canada and you graduate, you can get a job, whereas in the States you can't, right? I don't know if you guys remember, but Obama about 10 years ago said, if you're a foreign exchange student and you graduate from a US university, you should have a green card stapled to your diploma. Obviously that didn't happen. So what a lot of clients end up having to do is EB-5. So the pathway depends on the person. I would say the majority of our clients move either during high school or right before, you know, college starts, usually so that their kids can start assimilating into US life, because it is very different than, you know, obviously Asia, but even Europe, it's a very different country. You know, you have to submit an application to the US government. If you manage to get to the US while you submit that application, you can actually switch over to the EB-5 green card immediately in about 2 to 3 months. Most people, however, can't do that. And so after you apply, you have to wait between 1 and 2 years before you can move to the States. So what we generally recommend is for people to plan in advance. It's a good time to start planning. As Tess mentioned, you know, just the process of applying to schools is difficult in and of itself, and then finding out which schools you want to go to. The US, like Canada, has hundreds that I chose where I wanted to go, and I'm from the US, right? So after you've lived on the green card for a couple years, you switch to a permanent green card, and then which is what a lot of our clients do.
Yeah. And just jumping in there, it's very interesting. You're talking about employment post-graduation, and we're in the process of putting together a report that's going to be looking at all sorts of information. But one of the key things is, and you know, the more I speak to parents, the more I realize that many of them haven't thought about this. But you know, what about return on investment? Because sending their child to, you know, I've taken an example here of a Filipino family. We work with lots of Filipino families, and these are really important conversations to have with them, because they will be sending, if their child is going in as an international student, okay, studying in McGill, 189,000 Canadian dollars for 3 years, not even 4, as an engineering student. That's a lot of money. Now, if they have to go back to the Philippines after they've graduated, the earning potential for an engineer in the Philippines is $3,751 a year average. Now, if you look at what they can earn in Canada, it's $634,000 a year. So it's these sort of conversations that you know, when you start talking to parents about this, and they realize that actually by investing up front in their child's residency and then citizenship, they as a family are going to see that child be able to have a career and opportunities that in other countries they may simply not have. So it goes well beyond just the education element. As a family, it's the whole planning of it that needs to be considered.
And Tess, you mentioned that if they were an international student, what if they were domestic or living in Quebec?
Right.
Yes, so because $189,000, people are like, wow, which is true as an international student.
It's a lot of money for anyone. But interesting, I mean, in Canada, for instance, in Quebec, if you're considered a Quebec resident, then for the 3 years for engineering, same course, 35,500 Canadian dollars. If you're not a Quebec student, it goes up to 17,000. 100, something like that. But it is massively lower than international students, so it makes a real difference. And you know, with regards to the access for, you know, support, financial support, there are you know, grants, but there's also sort of government provisions for financial aid that aren't available for international students. So there are all of these many things to take into consideration when weighing up the pros and cons of, you know, do we give our child the possibility to graduate with both a degree and a passport?
Yes, thank you very much. Since you mentioned about this topic, I'm thinking about how about in USA, and what's the typical saving for a family that can ensure their children is treated as a local student versus like foreign student?
Yeah,
it's very hard to say. I'm sorry, Tess, if you want to answer.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
So you know, so the US has something called state schools. So, you know, schools like UCLA, I think, are some of the more famous ones, or the University of Texas at Austin. Typically, they're a lot less expensive. I wouldn't say it's the same savings as you would get at McGill, for instance, if you were an international student versus a domestic student. But typically it's around, you know, half the cost. And that depends on state to state. You know, some states subsidize their schools more heavily. The US is a very large country, and each state has entirely different laws. I'm sure everyone knows this. So it depends to what extent each individual state is subsidizing their schools. But, you know, if you are, the benefits are, if you're a foreign student, you do EB-5 and you get your green card, first, you're allowed to, I think one of the biggest and most significant impacts that I haven't mentioned yet is you're applying as an American, which means that, you know, when we're talking about Harvard, I believe Tess said there were something like 60,000 applications. The overwhelming majority of those are Chinese and Indian students, just because the populations of those countries are so big. So if you're an international student, you're applying against, you know, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people from China and from India, and they're all going to have the best grades in the world. Whereas if you're an American green card holder, then your competition is other Americans instead of the entire world. So I would say that is absolutely a big benefit. And then if you look at a state by state basis, so if you were to go to the University of Texas and you were living in Texas, they also have a quota for Texas residents. So you would be able to be counted amongst those people. So if you're going the state school route, and there are some very, very good state schools, you don't have to go to the Ivy League, right? Then it's absolutely a massive benefit, not just in terms of cost, but in terms of the school, the level of school that you would be able to apply to if you had a green card versus not having a green card.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it is really interesting, actually, looking at the data coming out of colleges about their acceptance rate and the percentage of international students. And because schools will never say that they will take more domestic, they always say that we will take the best candidates, which is fine. But the data shows that that's just not the case. So I'm sticking to Harvard because I've got my Harvard data, and there are so many others to talk about. But, you know, it's very clear. International, they have 57,000 applicants for the class of 27. So it's the most recent applications. International students made up 15.4%. So there's an awful lot of domestic students who got the rest of the places. And for McGill, it's something similar. 20% were international and the rest are domestic. So it does clearly demonstrate, I mean, obviously there will be probably more domestic students applying. So, but even so, there is clearly more domestic success and international success.
And I think what Tess mentioned earlier is, where are they comfortable? And that's why I like how Oliver said, you know, an LA, a New York, right? Where it is more metropolitan for Chinese immigrants, Southeast Asian immigrants, Latin America. So that's where it is great. And in Canada, we're all made up of immigrants. So it is very accepting. We have Chinatown, we have Little Vietnamese Town, we have Greek Town, we have Little Italy, we have Little Filipino Town, right? We've got Little Manila. So actually, where our office is, it's the highest concentration of Filipinos outside of Metro Manila. And we're there every 3 to 6 months because we go where people need. So Vietnam, we're there with Henley and Partners. We're there. We're going to be there in Hong Kong and Shanghai and Dubai. So it's not just on this, and this is a great panel, but as Tess said, let's get the one-on-one information. Oliver had some great stats, so I'm going to go back because we want to make sure we have a balanced argument here too. And that is, for a lot of people, they come to Canada first. Why? We can get you here in 6 months, even as little as 3 months. On a work permit, you can work anywhere you want and study. No one else can do that. You can only do that through Henley and KPMG Law. Why? They have the offices all over the world that can help vet us and basically fast track you. Now, what does that mean? You could be doing that while waiting for your EB-5. It's a lot easier to be doing that. But I'm going to focus on Canada because that's what I'm here for doing, is you can move and live anywhere. Now, the great thing too is if you've got one child, you're going to be living where that child is going to school. Okay, so you could be going there and say it changes. You could move as well. Where a lot of the programs you do not have that. The whole family can come, husband and spouse, they can both work anywhere, and all kids under 22. And again, you get that up front. In as little as 6 months, we can do 3 months, permanent residency in 2 years, and citizenship 3 years after that. It is the fastest way of any G20 country to get permanent residency. And I'm going to focus on permanent residency here. You have all the same rights as me, a naturalized born Canadian. You just can't vote. So some people actually keep permanent residency because they're so fixated on the US or fixated on their home country. Great. We customize this for you. But I'm going to go back to this. If your child gets into Harvard, send them to Harvard. It's not a big difference in savings. However, when they are applying for a job and they don't have their EB-5 yet, because it can take, and Oliver, I don't want to speak to this, 8-10 years, depending, or say you start late, start in Canada while you're trying to do your US EB-5 dream. But for a lot of people, ours is the #1 place, according to the Economist and US News, is the #1 place to live in. I love when our neighbors down the south in US News says Canada is the best place to live in. That must make them turn and grow. And with this on this side too is, it does not matter. If you want to go to the US, go to the US. Speak to Anne, speak to Oliver. If you want to go to the UK, go to the UK, talk to Tess. And if you want to look at Canada, all we're saying is get all your information, get all your options, but plan ahead of time. If you're late to the party, late to the game, Canada might be your only solution because we can get you here in 3 to 6 months, but that's not always the best way. If you have the time, Tess can do the assessment and can do everything else to do the evaluation, and then you can see. So the main purpose of this is do your fact, do your research, and start ahead of time.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agree.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I think things Ryan mentioned about the process is faster for Canadian startup program. And I'm just curious, how about for the EB-5 program, how, Oliver, what do you see in general the process takes to get the green card?
The issue with the US is it's a little bit complicated. There are multiple stages. So previously, going back to like 2019, the US had retrogression, meaning a backlog of cases for China, for India, for Vietnam. Last year, the US government reauthorized the EB-5 program. And in doing so, they created new visa categories for EB-5 investors that take them out of the backlog. So right now, China, India, Vietnam, there's no backlog anywhere in the world. And we're seeing applications come in around a year. We think that the average is going to be higher than that. It's probably going to be around 2 years. And that's from the start of, you start working on all of your documents. The application for EB-5 is a little bit tedious. Once you send that in, then we're seeing approval in like 1 to 2 years, that kind of time frame. One other thing that the US government did, which is a huge benefit, is if you are already in the US on, let's say, a student visa, an F1 visa, you can switch over from that at the time that you file your EB-5 application. So it's called the 485. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details. But if you do that, so let's say you're a student, we actually have a client who's a student at NYU, and we actually have a client at Harvard and Yale, funnily enough, that are applying with us right now. So they sent in their application, and at the same time, they sent in a different application called a 485, which allows them to switch over to an EB-5 visa even before it's approved. So we have many clients doing that now, which means that you can get onto an EB-5 visa in as little as 3 months. However, if you are not in the US right now and you're not, or your children aren't studying in the US right now, then it's at least a 1 and probably up to a 2-year process. So I'm sorry, there isn't a short and easy answer to that. And that's just to get the conditional green card, which is an entirely different thing. So it's a longer process. There's definitely more risk involved. So you absolutely should consider all of your options as an investor to see really what's best for you. Everybody's different. Yeah, and every country is different, right? So it really depends on individual circumstances and desires.
And Oliver, that's the conditional green card. How long for the actual green card?
Well, the conditional green card gives you all of the same rights as the permanent green card. I don't want to go into too much detail on that because then it gets into creating jobs. Our projects that we're selling right now have actually already met all of the requirements for the permanent green cards. So if an investor chooses our project, there isn't the risk associated with it. but that's an additional 2 years. And all that does is it just goes from conditional to permanent. But it doesn't actually change what you're able to do in the United States. You're still, you're still allowed to work and study and all of the benefits. It's the same as Canada. You can't vote is basically the biggest difference. I'm not sure you want to vote anyway. Not very good choices in the US right now.
I didn't say
I
a word.
love that, Oliver. Yes, yes.
Well, as an American, I'm allowed to say that, right?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the US too, so it's there. I'm going to go back to Tessa's comment about the advantages of permanent residency too. In Canada, there's a huge savings, but I'm going to pose a question to Tess to get ready after is where does Canada rank on the university sides, our top schools too. But with it, when you're a permanent resident, you can buy real estate, and that can happen quite fast. You can apply for loans, you can apply for grants. So, and I'm going to use some stats. I'm just big on stats, especially being an ex-banker. University of Waterloo is one of the top engineering schools. And the first year tuition, if you're a Canadian resident or permanent resident, is $9,000 compared to $67,941. So you save $58,941 per year, and it's a top Ivy League school, one of the best engineering schools in the world. And again, we're focusing on a lot of the top names, but I think it is important. And as Tess mentioned, if you have the marks, you get in. I'm going to say that again. If you have the marks, you get in. Same thing with all of our high schools or IB schools. There's no tests. There's no placements. If you live in that area, you get in. If you need healthcare, you're there. You have free education, free healthcare. So University of Toronto, great for law, great for pre-med, same with McGill, is $6,590. An international student, $54,690. So you're saving over $39,000 per year. On a 4-year degree, $1,506. Sorry. McGill, local, $2,391 compared to $29,000. So you're talking about a massive savings, planning ahead of McGill, $100,000 to University of Waterloo for a 4-year degree, $2,305. And our program costs around, on average, for a whole family, husband and spouse and 2-3 kids, $250,000 US. So that's just for one kid. As soon as you have a second kid doing a 4-year degree, not even a master's or anything else, you've almost doubled your money. So when we're talking about return on investment, as Tess mentioned, we're already there just for school savings because you've planned ahead. Let alone when you are applying, you're applying for a job as a Canadian citizen, because the purpose of this seminar is your kids, by the end of that time, because basically 3 years after living in Canada, you can apply for citizenship. Or even as a permanent resident, you can work anywhere in Canada. You get a degree, an engineering degree, and I love Tessa's numbers, $96,000 as an engineer in Canada. So the return on investment, being an ex-banker, is huge. But also, let's talk about quality of life. Let's talk about the whole family. The person can actually travel back and forth. And if you're traveling for your Canadian business, it counts as your time in Canada. So you can still keep your business growing in China, in Vietnam, in Hong Kong, in wherever you are, Dubai, India, while your kids are settled here in the most accepting country we believe in the world, friendliest as well, where we are here in Toronto. So look at that, not just schooling, but look at the work opportunities, look at the savings. And again, we're going back to Tessa's, if you plan ahead. And that's why when this came up, I said, this is an amazing opportunity to speak to parents as a fellow father and my wife. We want a legacy for our children. We want a better life for them no matter what. And if you're on this call, it means you probably can afford to do that. But you've got to take the time to plan ahead. And if not, the great thing is you can still do Canada. We can have you here in 3 to 6 months. But is that the best thing for your child and kid? And if they're already here, same thing, we can switch them over. But more importantly to that is the whole family gets PR. The whole family can get citizenship, healthcare, free education. And when your kids graduate, you have citizenship. Now, also for a lot of people, if you're going to the small towns, like some of the other programs all over the world, it's not as accepting. I've been to 55 countries, lived and worked in 12. Canada is. We are a microcosm or micro groups of these areas, in the big areas where the big schools are and the big names. So you have to do your research also. Where are you going to live? And what's your backup plan? And that's what we can do with time, with great people at Henley and Partners like Anne and her other colleagues, like Tess and people all over. We are speaking in Dubai, and we are actually changing our topic because of this, of focusing on, because the number one reason why most people move, and I'm sure Oliver can agree, is their kids' education. He mentioned it too. But we don't want to do that. We want to keep the families together. So we're going to set you up with a business, or you can work anywhere in Canada, anytime, with full access to the United States. And no other program can do that. But is that right for you? You decide.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I just saw this Q&A question. I think Tess, perhaps you can help us to answer these. The question is, can we go to the US via an exchange program through university like Singapore?
I'm not sure, to be quite honest. I don't know. It depends on the program. It depends on the age. Sorry?
I was just saying I can hop in
Good.
to answer.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So yes, you're absolutely right. It depends. A lot of foreign universities have foreign exchange program for maybe a semester or for a year. However, if you're doing that, I'm not an immigration attorney, but I'm fairly certain that you cannot apply for, you can't use that to do the transfer of visa that I was talking about. So that would have to be an independent from EB-5, wouldn't be connected to the process at all. To use the 485, which is concurrent filing, where you're living in the US on a student visa, and then you get kind of the fast track into EB-5, you have to be attending a US university. I do not believe that you could say, be going to school in Singapore college, and absolutely do it.
Yeah, I'll help him finish that comment because he's breaking up there.
If you're a student.
Oh. So it counts as a visitor. You're a visitor there. You're a visitor in the US.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Oliver, you're breaking up a bit, so I'll just help you out there. You are a visitor in that country.
Student in Singapore, you can
so what Oliver's trying to, and he's at a wedding, so we appreciate him making the time to be here. So it's great. We did want to have a balanced argument, so thank you, Oliver, for that. And he's frozen there. But yes, for that side, and Tess or Anne, please jump in. You are a visitor. You can normally do it for a semester. Same thing in Canada. It's very similar, up to a year, but not more than that. And as Oliver mentioned, him not being an immigration lawyer, me either, it does not transfer over. And that's what our researcher said too. This is not deemed as Oliver and I, Tess and Anne, are not giving immigration advice. So please, we're giving a balanced education argument or debate, and not even argument, but conversation, we'll say, on this. So you act as a visitor, so it can't transfer over. So it's a great way to expose someone. But you still need to do and pay for healthcare. Same thing in Canada. So you are there as a visitor, it does not count. Now, if you are trying to apply later on, it may help you with some points in Canada for different things, but that's not what this is about. You want to go do a visitor site, you can do that. different schools do the acceptance and the exchange that is done through that Singapore university. And there are exchanges all over the world.
Yeah.
The issue with that is you pay tuition on both sides. So you pay tuition in Singapore, and then you pay tuition in Canada or the US or Canada. So it's a great exposure.
Yeah, I mean, usually with regards to exchange, because my daughter actually was studying in the UK. If COVID had not happened, the plan was she was going to do a semester over in the States. But unfortunately, COVID had other plans. She didn't do it. But the university she was studying in the UK charged less for the semester that she was doing her exchange. So they tend to sort of take that into consideration. But if it's just an exchange, yes, there are all sorts of exchanges around the world, but they don't, as Ryan and Oliver were saying, they don't replace the visa situation that you need to actually get the permanent residency.
The healthcare and the accessibility.
Exactly.
And for us, the application can be just in the student's name. But if you're just doing that for the student, we've done it for 18-year-olds to 88-year-olds. But it's the same price if your children, this is part of the planning, if your children, I know it's kind of weird, children 21, or if your children are under 22, the primary applicant is the father or mother. They need to have English level 5, which is the lowest English levels of any program in the world, which basically means you can understand us or watch a movie in English or French. It also means that the whole family can come there. So even if they don't quite have English yet. And the great thing about this too is it is for the whole family. So they all have that. And I'm going to go back to one other point too. That we were discussing back and forth here is there is a great benefit of moving anywhere, right? In Canada, the US. Go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, there's just one more Q&A, and I think Oliver might able to help us to answer this.
So again, I'm not an immigration attorney, and this question, I would say most of our clients, if they're doing the 485, which is a fast track to EB5, it would be the student as the primary applicant. However, that would depend on where the parent was. So if they were already living in the US, I assume based off of the question that they weren't, but I would say the overwhelming majority of the time, if you wanted to have the 485 application be done for a student in the US, then the student would be the applicant themselves.
Okay. Just gonna repeat the question just now. There was a Q&A saying, for this fast track to EB5, should the application be under the name of your child who is studying in the USA, or it can be under the name of the parent?
So short answer, it depends, but almost certainly the student studying in the US already.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Ryan? Just Ryan, just now you would like to add on?
Sure. Yeah. So if we're doing that, the equivalent side for Canada is if rather than just one person, we prefer everyone doing it because it's the same price, same fee. So the $250,000 US would be for under one of the primaries, the husband or the spouse, and all kids. So that's the difference too. It's not just one person, it's everyone. And then that's a great future for everyone, including if they need to travel back and forth. So the application on our side, and again, as Oliver said, it all depends because there isn't one, we say in Canada, one size fits all. There's not just, one path that everyone does. So we customize this. Do you want to get to Canada fast? We can get you here in 3 to 6 months. Do you want to wait for all the benefits? Then wait for 2 years. So one of the biggest things on this side is we do it to get everyone the most benefits, even if they're not even going to be in Canada. It at least allows them to have a permanent residency that they can renew every single 5 years, even as a plan B.
There's another question for Oliver here.
You like me to, I can read it aloud. So for E5, if the parent is the main applicant, do both parents need to be in the USA when the visa is issued, or can one still work overseas outside of the US after the EB5 is issued? This again depends. You do not need to be in the United States when you apply for EB5. You can be anywhere in the world. You can be in your home country. I would say we do have some clients, mostly from Asia, who have the mother often be the primary applicant for EB5. And then maybe the father has a job or a factory or something that he's going to be doing in Asia. Then he actually won't even be a part of the EB5 visa because you can always do it later. So if your family has done an EB5 application, as you can always join later as a spouse if it was your husband or wife who did it. So again, it's an excellent question. It's best directed towards an immigration attorney. Number two, you do not have to be in the United States when you apply for EB5. It just allows you to potentially speed up the process if you're already there on a different visa.
Thank you, Oliver. I think that will be the question for all of us today. And thank you for everyone for your time. So after the end of this webinar, you'll receive an individual email with my complete detail in it. So you have more questions with regard to with our educational services or with Ryan, we can set up a one-to-one meeting with them. Thank you so much and hope you enjoy your evening.
Yes, thank you all for your time. We look forward to connecting.
Pleasure.
Thank you all. Thanks,
so
Tess.
much.
Thanks, Oliver.
Bye,
Thanks,
Anne. Bye, Oliver. Bye, Anne.
Guys.
Bye.